Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. Thank you, students, for joining us today. Duquesne University Center for Global Engagement for our webinar series. And today is a very great day to join because we are joined by a former student who is going to tell us all about OPT. My name is Sarah Souza. I'm the Assistant Director for International Admissions here at Duquesne. And thank you again for joining to our guests and to our prospective students. Just to remind you a little bit before we get started, OPT is optional practical training, and that is a program that allows you to work mostly after you graduate in the United States on your F1 visa. So we can talk a little bit more about that during our interview, but I just want to make sure everyone knows what we're talking about here today. So Tarun, thank you so much for joining us. And would you like to introduce yourself and we can get started here?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Tarun, and I joined Duquesne in the fall of 2016. And so I came from India, and I came for my PhD program. So I was associated with the School of Pharmacy, and my major was pharmacology. I just graduated about 6 months ago in April, and I have been on my OPT ever since. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.
That's great. So I'd like you to talk about maybe the preparation period that went into OPT. So I'm guessing you started towards your graduation.
With the PhD program, it's a little different in the sense that it's all dependent upon when you defend versus when you actually have your commencement and your graduation. So for me, it was entirely dependent upon the day of the defense. So once I knew the approximate timeline about when I'm going to be defending, at least the month, I started working backwards. And I think about 4-ish months before my defense, I got in touch with the international office at Duquesne to know all about the procedures for applying for the OPT. And just so you guys know, you're only allowed to apply for it, I think 90 days before your program end date, which could either be the date of your defense if you're doing a thesis, or it could be the date that you're graduating. And so I sent my stuff in, I think on the 89th day, pretty much, because I was advised that it has been taking a long time for USCIS to give you approvals. And we should also keep in mind that when I was applying, we were still in the peak of COVID. So it was taking even longer. But I think over the past 2 years, USCIS has been good at converting the application from a paper-only application to an online application. So actually, it's gotten much easier to apply. I feel like people could just do it within a day if they have all of their documents ready. You don't necessarily have to mail anything in anymore.
And you did the paper
No, I
application.
did the online. I did
And
the
you and how did you find the online experience with working with our office and the online application?
I actually think it was super easy. I knew some of my peers who had done the paper application much before me because they didn't have the option of doing online, and they were very critical of the paper application process. The online application was super easy. Once I had all my documents ready, I actually went to the international office and I filled the form with someone next to me from the Duquesne International Office. And Mary was the one I was working with, and she, checked everything that I was uploading the correct document within the correct section because that's super important. And also making sure to upload all documents that they ask for. You don't want to, miss anything out because that can lead to, delays in your process of approval. So I actually found it super easy.
That's great to hear. So tell us a little bit about your application process then after the application process. So the job application process, how was that for you?
Yeah, so for me, I actually had secured a job offer even before I applied for the OPT, although you don't necessarily have to do that. A lot of people apply for their OPT and then start looking for a job. So it is totally dependent upon what kind of major you are in or what kind of degree process you're in. So for me, since I did a PhD, I knew that I wanted to get into academia. And in order to have my own independent research lab, I knew that I needed to do a postdoctoral fellowship. So that's what I'm currently doing at Emory University in Atlanta. And so I already had gotten an offer from a lab to work with them. And I think after I applied for the OPT, all I had to do was literally just wait because I had everything in order. I had an official job, offer letter. I had a start date. So it was super easy that way, yes.
And can you tell us about the location you moved and your job that you're doing now? I think students are very interested to hear.
Sure. So in my PhD, I worked with Dr. Rehana Leek in the School of Pharmacy, and we worked on neurodegenerative diseases. And I knew I always was interested in neuroscience. So currently, I'm doing my fellowship with Dr. Stephen Sloan at Emory University, and we work on understanding the mechanisms that are important for brain cancer formation.
That's excellent. And can you tell the students about your location and
Yeah.
moving around, because that's an important thing to highlight too. You don't have to stay in Pittsburgh for OPT,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, you don't have to stay in Pittsburgh. I think you can pretty much move anywhere within the United States. So I moved from Pittsburgh, which is in Pennsylvania, to the south of the United States, which is a state called Georgia, and I'm currently in Atlanta.
Okay, that's great. Students that are here today, I want to remind you, please, that you can put your questions in the chat. I'll have my colleague assisting in these questions, and we can have them answered directly by our guest host today. So while we're discussing, please do put your questions in the chat. So for students interested in a similar field in research, scientific research, any advice for them for maybe internships or this OPT searching for opportunities?
Yeah, I think the advice that I would give is that during your graduate school program or undergrad program, try and get as much experience as you can. Duquesne has several labs that will be more than welcoming to both undergrad and grad student researchers. I feel like some people know what they want to do from the very beginning, while others are still trying to figure it out while they're in school. I think in either case, if you feel like you are driven towards research or science, it would be important to get some wet lab experience while you are in school itself. It helps in your CV, it helps in your interviews for your next job. And I think one thing that people are really looking out for is students who have some form of experience but also are willing to learn. So I think those are the two things that I would highly recommend for everybody.
That's great advice. And I asked you this before we got started. You said that you didn't do CPT, but you did a lot of experience here at Duquesne before. So can you tell students what is available at Duquesne for that they can get that experience?
Sure. So because I was in a PhD program, I had about 2 years of coursework and classes. And then for the next 3 to 4 years, one works on their dissertation or thesis project. So I was associated with a particular lab within the School of Pharmacy, and I was a research assistant in that lab. So I actually also got a stipend while I was a PhD student at Duquesne, which was super helpful because I would say Pittsburgh is, pretty affordable for graduate students and undergraduate students, and the stipend really helped me. So I think that was super useful. I was a research assistant, and then for 2 semesters, I was also a teaching assistant, where I was helping professors develop courses for the PharmD programs in the School of Pharmacy.
That's excellent. You had great opportunities, and for students listening, our pharmacy school is one of the most famous programs at Duquesne. So it's excellent that we have a student to hear from that graduated from that renowned program. We have a question from a student that is asking about OPT. Is it reserved for STEM graduates alone? This student looks like an MBA student. So no, MBA students can do OPT. You can do, every student that comes to Duquesne or any other school in the United States can do 1 year, no matter what your major is. But if you are a STEM major, and for MBA, there is some possibility for a STEM designation, so we can talk about that separately. But the STEM designation allows you to work an extra 2 years for the STEM designation. So are you working in the STEM extension for OPT?
No, I'm currently still in the first year of the OPT, but I do plan to apply for the STEM OPT in the next few months. Yes.
Right. So that's a great benefit of the STEM studies, and it is a separate application process. So you'll get to redo that whole process
Yeah.
again. So good thing that it was easy for you. Okay. Yeah, so that question was answered. So any of your classmates that you graduated with that you stay in touch with, did they also pursue OPT?
Actually, everybody I know pursues OPT. It's highly unlikely that anyone would choose not to do that. I know people who have done their OPT and STEM OPT and then chosen to leave the United States, but most of the people I know have taken advantage of this opportunity, and I would highly encourage everyone to do that.
Yeah, that's part of the reason we're doing this today, is to get students to start thinking about it early, because especially if the students are doing masters, it's only a 2-year program. So those 2 years go by so fast, and beginning to plan ahead is so important to take advantage of the opportunity. When you were planning for this OPT, how long, I know you said it depended on your dissertation date, but how far in advance did you start thinking about it? Did you start preparing your resume and these type of things?
I think in the last year is when I started preparing my resume. I started talking to my thesis advisor about what her recommendations for my next job would be. And then I think about 5 to 6 months before I knew I was going to defend my dissertation, I applied to jobs. And then, there's a whole interview process. And because I was applying during COVID, a lot of the jobs were doing virtual interviews. And then some places were still requiring you to fly out to them and do an in-person interview. So it's highly dependent upon where you apply. But I would say like 5 to 6 months before I knew that I was going to defend was when I seriously started working on my job applications.
That's great. So you worked with your partner to prepare your CV and those aspects. Did
Yeah,
you?
so everybody has like a graduate school advisor, and they would be more than happy to look at your CV. They will also be someone you would go to for a letter of recommendation, because a lot of the jobs would require, between 1 to 3 letters of recommendation. Some employers would also require a phone call with your recommendation provider and not just a physical letter. So it's important to build those networks and relationships while you're within school so that you have someone that you can rely on.
Yes, you kind of answered my question already. Was about the recommendation, is having those resources ready. And it sounds like you did. For the students that are listening that might not be familiar with that, many jobs here, they ask you to either submit a recommendation letter, but definitely submit names, and they contact those recommenders. So it's really important that you notify whoever you're listing so they're ready and can speak about how great you are to help you get hired. And our Career Center also helps with resumes. So that's another option for students to pursue when they're on campus. It makes sense that you use your department because it's a very specialized field. And then students, to get another eye or get some advice on career aspects, can also go to the Career Center. So any major differences you noticed between being a student in Pittsburgh and working in Atlanta?
I think being a student just generally protects you a lot. I've only been at my job as an employee for the past 6 months. It's very different than being a student. So I would say, like, make sure you're, taking advantage of all possible opportunities that you can as a student, because you don't necessarily always get them as an employee. It's highly dependent upon the field, but I would say that for the most part, you are held more accountable as an employee.
Can you expand a little bit upon what those opportunities are as a student that you would suggest students, and even if specific ones here at Duquesne, since all these students have interest in Duquesne.
Yeah, so I would say, at least I'll speak for the sciences. There are poster sessions that Duquesne holds every now and then to showcase your research. You should also know that Duquesne is in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh has two other major universities, that's Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh. And a lot of times you'll notice that those universities also hold a lot of sessions for young scientists and researchers to showcase their research. So I took a lot of advantage of all of that. I was able to build some networks with those other schools as well and work on some collaborative projects. So that was super helpful. In fact, one of my recommendation providers was actually not from Duquesne, was from another school within Pittsburgh. But I feel like I wouldn't have had that opportunity if I wasn't in a place that had these other schools to work with. Within Duquesne, I would also say that, every professor within your department would be more than willing to, for example, have you TA for them. So if you want to get experienced teaching, because not everybody, knows whether they want to teach later, that is an opportunity that is available to you. And as you mentioned, like the Center for Career Development is pretty good as well. They look at your resumes, you see job opportunities every now and then. I know that there are some programs within the sciences that also support internship opportunities while you're still a student. I didn't do that, but I do know some of my peers who were able to take advantage of that.
Mhm. Thank you for highlighting that. Just a reminder to our students, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. We don't have an endless time, unfortunately, with our guest host here today because he is very busy. It was hard to even get him today on the call. I know it was interesting. You were telling me about your experiments. So can you tell the students what you're explaining to me is very interesting.
Yeah, so the reason it was difficult for me to schedule anything was because I work very closely with a couple of neurosurgeons at a nearby hospital. So because I work on brain cancers, I work actually on human brain tissue. And, as you can imagine, that surgeries can be emergent surgeries. And so there are a lot of times where I'm told the morning of that there's an emergency surgery in 2 hours. And if you want the tissue, you have to be ready to retrieve it. That hasn't been the case this morning, thankfully. But so that's why my schedule does get pretty erratic at times. So it's difficult for me to schedule anything from Mondays to Fridays for the most part.
Well, we're just so glad that you were able to join us, and the work you're doing is just so impressive. My colleagues that are on the call, Mike, Ed, if you have any questions, please jump in here. It is so wonderful to hear from a former student and hear the amazing work that you're doing. And we're just so glad that you were able to join. It's a real benefit to our students. I think, some takeaways from today, planning ahead, it sounds like you very much did a good job in understanding the OPT process. Did you do a lot of research on your own, or did you use some of the resources in the office? How did you learn about OPT?
Yeah, so actually, I think I was told about the OPT opportunities after I joined Duquesne during the International Student Orientation. So you hear about it, from the very first day. So I would say that when you join the school, you will be told about it from the beginning. You'll be provided with some resources as well. And then people from the international office will tell you that when you're closer to the date when you want to apply for OPT, you should come talk to them, and they'll encourage that a lot. So I went up to Mary, I would say a few months before, and I actually sat with her and she described the whole process to me from the beginning to the end. She also sent me a nice email with, a list of documents that I need to make sure I have scanned and I have it all ready with me. And then she said that once I'm ready to actually apply, I can start filling up the form and then go to her, show her exactly what I have uploaded, exactly what I have written for each of the sections, and she'll go over them, and then we can literally hit submit together.
That's great. It's such good advice. Yes. So students, from the start, pay attention during that orientation. We give you good tips, and it helps make the process smoother, as you see here with this case. A student asked, How relevant is experience outside of the US when you apply for US-based OPT jobs?
I would say any experience is good experience. I don't think they look down upon having experience outside the United States versus inside the United States. It's all about how can you defend what you have done, and how relevant it is for the job opportunity that you are applying when you're going for your OPT. So I would say it doesn't hurt to have it, but it should be related to what you are planning to do. And that's the only way you would be able to defend that it is useful.
That's great advice. Yes. So definitely collect your experience that you do abroad. And I think presenting it in a relevant way on the resume that is culturally acceptable in the US is important as well. And collecting those reference letters as well. If your work was outstanding in your home country and other country, definitely collect those recommendation letters as well. And just a reminder to students, so the OPT jobs are always going to be in the US. That's a question sometimes we get. So if you leave in your OPT period and find a job outside of the US, that's no longer OPT. So OPT is just here in the United States. And did you entertain several different positions, or you kind of just found one that worked for you?
So this was the one that I wanted and I got it, but I also had another job offer from Philadelphia, actually, the University of Pennsylvania, which I did not take forward.
Wow, that's so impressive. It's really exciting to hear. Well, students, I don't see any other questions in the chat. That means that I guess you answered the students' questions today, because they're quite quiet. It's it's been so wonderful to hear about your experience, and we're just so grateful for you to take the time to help our future students to start thinking about OPT. This is such an important capstone to your education experience. And I think as you spoke to the amazing work you're doing, it's transformative, and it's so impressive. Any comments you'd like to close with, advice to our students as they're in the process where maybe still deciding where they want to go, or if they haven't decided, or if they've already decided, maybe they're coming to Duquesne, they're preparing to come here. Any advice for them?
Yeah, I would say if you're coming in the winter, make sure you have lots of jackets. It can get cold in Pittsburgh. But apart from that, I would just, reiterate my point that while you're a student, I feel like there are just a lot many more opportunities, and you have mentors and advisors within Duquesne that are more than willing and happy to, provide you with those opportunities or to direct you to other people who may have those opportunities. So try and make sure that you're building those connections from the beginning. It never hurts to go up to a professor or a teacher, and just introduce yourself, and talk about what you're doing. Generally, they will give you the time of day. And I would say that if you build that from the beginning, you will be thankful about it towards the end when you need to get those letter of recommendations. Because I know a lot of people struggle with, when you have when jobs require that you have three letters of recommendation from three different people, some people may have just one or two, and then they don't know what to do with the third. So I think it's important, just for that sake at least, to build those connections from the beginning.
Wonderful advice. A lot of thank yous in the chat from our students and colleagues. So thank you so much for joining us today. We are just so grateful to listen to your story and hear about the amazing things you're doing. So thank you so much again from the Duquesne team and from our students.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, best of luck in your work.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.